Ankle sprains are one of the most common sports injuries that we see. And we usually think of the Rice method of the rest, ice, compress, and elevate, but that's actually an outdated model now. And the number one predictor of return to play and how quickly you can get back to sport or work is actually early weight bearing. So as soon as we can get you up walking, moving around, starting to increase the range of motion, increase the strength, the quicker you're going to be able to get back to life. And so in the office, one of the best things we can do is dry needling, which actually helps decrease the inflammation and actually speed up the healing time. And then with that, we can use blood flow restriction to start to really accelerate regaining that strength and mobility back in that ankle to help get you back on your feet. Usually we have pretty good results with ankle sprains and we can get you back relatively quick. So yeah, we don't want to do the Rice method of the rest, ice and compress and elevate, but we want to do that early weight bearing, get you moving as soon as possible to get you back faster.